The Falcons are playing above expectation, but will that be enough to upset the Bills on Monday night?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And on today's Locked On Falcons, we'll be looking ahead to the upcoming matchup on Monday Night Football between the Atlanta Falcons and Buffalo Bills. But since we are still technically coming off the bye week, I do want to pick my guest's brain on the current state of the Atlanta Falcons and what are some of the things that he hopes to see them improve upon coming out of the bye. And so I should introduce my guest. He is none other than Allen Strk, former host of the Locked On Falcons, or co-host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, current contributor over at the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. And if you don't know me, I am the current host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, Aaron Freeman. I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this podcast, and I think each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers, that means you make this very humble podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, Alan, my friend, welcome back to Locked On Falcons. Now that the Falcons are 4 games into the season, 5 weeks into this 2025 season, when you look back at things so far, are the Falcons at, above, or below your expectation for where you thought they would be at this stage in the season?
I'm going to say slightly above expectations, and that's because I'm just going to erase the Panthers game from my mind.
Okay, fair enough.
We'll see if that game's an anomaly, but it's just Panks couldn't function in the pocket. Team just didn't look prepared. I'm going to weigh the 3 games against 3 playoff teams from last year, and I look at all 3 of those games where the Falcons rightfully won those games, or they unfortunately fell short, but I thought they outplayed Tampa Bay. I'm super impressed with the defense right now. I know we talked about a couple years ago, Ryan Nielsen, how organized he had that defense, but I'm getting similar feelings with this defense, but it's a whole shift when it comes to how they're operating, when it comes to having them a little bit more of an undersized front, because back in 2023, they had the big, bulky edge rushes. We get to see the likes of Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree. Now you're seeing Jalen Walker, Leonard Floyd, Ketty, James Pierce Jr. So the schematic, personnel-wise, is different. And you could say schematically as well, because I think coverage-wise, Ryan Nielsen probably used man coverage a bit more than Jeff Ulbrich. But I just love the design, the plan, the identity of what Jeff Ulbrich's building. And then offensively, look at him. No hot take here. Bijan Robinson's the best running back in the league. Kyle Pitts, I think the resurgence is real, but let's give it a couple more games. And I think the offensive line has looked far more solid than I imagined. We had the conversation before the season. We were very concerned with the offensive line, and they've looked pretty solidified. So overall, I would say slightly above expectations. And if the Panthers' atrocity didn't happen, I would have said highly above expectations.
I think that's fair enough. Yeah, the Panthers game kind of throws a wrench into sort of any assessment, because you kind of got rock bottom in the sense of, you can argue that's one of the worst losses the Falcons have had in several years. And I've seen the Falcons lose a game 43-0. So that one was pretty much probably arguably worse, the Panthers one, because that team that they lost 43-0 to was, or 43-3, I think it was a Cowboys, and that was a playoff team back then in 2021. That was actually a good football team, and the Panthers look like anything but a good football team, but credit to them for coming back against Arizona, and the most improbable comeback ever. But I think you make some great points about the defense playing above expectation. Obviously, we'll get a little bit later into this Bills matchup specifically and what the defense could do. But I think you're coming up on a couple of games against some high-level quarterbacks. some high-level play callers, and some other offenses like the Indianapolis Colts that are playing above expectation. And I'm curious, are your expectations, given where this defense has performed through the first month of the season, do you think they will be able to maintain that high level of play over the next month of the season? Do you expect them to come back down to earth a little bit? Where are you at in terms of the trajectory of this defense?
I think they could make the opposing quarterbacks a little uncomfortable, just the way their blitz designs are. Like a little fact they use Diablo in the A gap, and then they'll have either like Billy Bowman or Jesse Bates between the B and the C gap. And then you'll also have at times, Kane Nelson is such a dynamic weapon, and the way they're utilizing him, even on the edge, like you saw against Washington, to contain Mariota with his own read. They had Kane Nelson play more on the edge, and even though he's not going to win the 1-on-1 on the outside, just because he's just not a pure pass rusher like that, I feel like he's still a weapon there who could hold his own, and you could run a couple of twists with him. What I would be concerned about is just the fact that you talk about Buffalo, you talk about Indianapolis. I think they're two of the top 5 most prolific running games right now, and the Falcons have looked very vulnerable on the ground. They just don't have the size, the way they're distributing snaps on the edge. Like the rookies just aren't capable of pulling up there quite as well. So I would be very concerned going up against the Bills and Colts, especially with, I think they're just, I know Bills just recently lost, but those at their peak, those offensive lines, they know how to create open lanes, and just the way they're pulling too, whether it be a Quinn Nelson or Deion Dawkins. It's just those teams know how to put together a running game, and they could slice you up in 4 or 5 different ways. And you saw what Washington did. So I'd be pretty concerned about how they hold up on the ground. But I think even against Josh Allen and then the Colts weapons with Daniel Jones, I don't think they'll get beat deep, and I think they could actually cause some problems. And it's really challenge these receivers, because I think both teams have a pretty versatile core.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the run defense, and I do agree with you. That's going to be a challenge. I think that's arguably the biggest weakness on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully we'll see that unit improve coming out of this bye week. I will also want to kind of pick your brain on what do you feel like the offense needs to be able to do coming out of this bye week to get to a more consistent level of play on that side of the ball. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So with the NFL season here, FanDuel is making sure that you are ready for kickoff with this can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. FanDuel has so many ways to win. If you want to bet the spread for this upcoming Monday night matchup, you can do so. The Bills are favored by 4.5 points. If you want to go with a player prop because you're feeling great about Josh Allen or Keon Coleman or Bijan Robinson, you can do that. And of course, if you want to combine all those bets into one, you can do so in a same game parlay. So what are you waiting for? Go visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. And also today's episode is brought to you by John Foy Associates, right? Some firms do it all: divorce, criminal, real estate, and sometimes injury cases. And that could cost you, because without the right focus, you may never get the attention that you deserve. At John Foy Associates, they focus 100% on personal injury law, car accidents, truck crashes, serious injuries. That's it. So when you call them, you're not getting a lawyer juggling different types of cases. You're getting a team built to win for you. And I love that they treat every client with dignity, compassion, and respect. And guess what? They're available 24/7 to take your call. So if you've been injured in a car accident by a negligent driver, don't let the insurance company rip you off. Get the justice and money that you deserve by calling John Foy Associates today at 404-400-4000. That's 404-400-4000, or visit johnfoy.com to get started. They don't just settle, they win. Get the strong arm. Call John Foy Associates today. So, Alan, typically in the bye week, the NFL teams do their self-scouting. I'm sure you've done plenty of quote unquote self-scouting as well, looking at this team. You've already talked about the run defensive struggles. I'm curious, are there any other things that kind of stood out to you that you feel like, okay, if the Falcons can resolve this issue, now we can really start talking about this team being a formidable challenge for, most of the teams that they face the rest of the way.
Using the Commanders' performance as a platform in that I want to see more condensed sets where through bunch formations, but also using motion with intent. I felt like the first few weeks they were just running motion to run motion and didn't really affect the defenses. It didn't really mess up their coverages or cause an imbalance. But then you saw against Washington from that first drive, I remember they motioned London near Pitts, and then they ran kind of like a high-low, and then Pitts was open on a deep corner for like a nice 23-yard gain. Just schematic things like that I think is very important. I think Zach Robinson really did a good job of creating those high percentage looks for Michael Penix, because as much as Michael Penix has struggled at times through the first 3 weeks, even though I did feel like he managed the game well against Minnesota and had a tremendous second half against Tampa, there's just been too many moments where he either has to hit those tight window throws or he has to check it down. And we saw how much of a disaster it was when he had to check it down against Carolina. I thought they schemed up really nicely for him against Washington, where he was able to hit more of those intermediate throws. Like you saw on a backside dig, he hit Drake London. That was really nice. And then the big explosive to Bijan. You saw Casey Washington and Drake London both running crossing patterns and affected Bobby Wagner and I think Trey Amos and I think it was Quan Martin, and just caused that disruption. So as much as I want to see Penix improve when it comes to his pocket navigation and hitting more of those intermediate throws, particularly across the middle of the field, I do think Zach Robinson needs to get better more at using the motion that really worked in 2024 and using some of those bunch formations, because we all know about Darnell Mooney's status, and it could be difficult for these receivers to create separation, even though the Bills secondary is pretty vulnerable. But I just think it would help Penix is processing and less impact on him just having to make those tight window throws.
And I'm curious, you bring up the motion. How much do you think the fact that the Falcons were able to better utilize that motion had to do with Zach Robinson calling plays from the sideline and getting the plays in sooner? Because we saw that for the first 3 games, that was a big problem, and it probably contributes to the motion kind of just not really doing the thing that it needs to do.
I think it's proof of concept, right? It happened while he was there. I don't know how much more of a response I could give other than he's proven it. Now, I know the Washington secondary is pretty slow, and they've had a couple of missteps at the start of the year, but they still have enough talent there, and they have a pretty good front. So Zach Robinson, look, I think he was pretty enthusiastic about how he was on the sideline. I think he admitted that he wished he got there sooner. So I think the impact is real.
Yeah. We'll see if it holds up, against a better defense. But I think you're right. I think if you're looking at a weakness in this Bills defense, they're kind of beat up all over the place. But their secondary is certainly, I think, suspect. I think, right now you kind of look at Benford as like the one guy that's good, and he hasn't really even been playing to his higher standard that he set last year. And then everybody else, I think, is a little suspect. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, to me, you have to force those safeties to tackle, whether it's at the second level in the run game or just across the middle of the field on passes. Like we've seen how good Kyle Pitts has looked after the catch, how much of a threat Drake London is after the catch. If Kadero Hodge is healthy, maybe could pull out another primetime special like he did against Tampa last year. I always got to bring up that moment. Buffalo, I'm surprised they have not upgraded safety over the last 2 years. It just seems like they're just, certain teams like the Rams are just going to get whoever they can linebacker, although shout out to the great Nate Landman. He's making an impact there. Mm-hmm. But there's certain teams that just don't invest in position. I feel like the Bills don't do that safety. Craig Bishop, Taylor Rapp, they are not reliable when it comes to tackling, and they do take poor angles. So I think the Falcons could punish them there. You expect in the run game, because the way the Bills are defending the run right now, that's probably the biggest vulnerability with them. But even when it comes to whether on hitches or digs, like attack them, especially given that Drake London's coming off his best game of the year.
Yeah, I do want to get more into this Bills matchup. We'll do that a little bit later. But circling back to the run defense, I'm of the mindset, looking at the film, charting some of it, like this Falcons run defense is very good when their base defense is on the field. They're very bad when their nickel defense is on the field. And I kind of chalk that up to just kind of being a byproduct of having those 4-3 overfronts that I've always felt like that defensive scheme was kind of vulnerable to the run, but it kind of offsets that by being so potent as a pass rush unit. And so it's kind of a pick your poison, similar to the conversation we were having after the Vikings game, where like Brian Flores' defense is like, we're going to play too high, we're not going to give up explosive plays, but that makes us vulnerable to the run. And I feel like the style of defense that Jeff Ulbrich plays with those 4-man fronts it's just kind of one of those things where it's just like you're just going to be vulnerable to that. You feel like that's a fair assessment, or do you feel like this run defense can get better given the current situation, the current scheme, the current personnel? What are your thoughts on how and can it get better for this Falcons run defense?
I think the current personnel is a concern because right now James Pierce just offers nothing when it comes to setting the edge. He's just undersized like that. I think you're asking a lot of Zach Harrison, as much as I think he's showing flashes and generating pressure as an interior rusher. It's just when he gets double teams, he just doesn't have the size to hold up. And I think you could say the same for Brandon Dorlus as well. It's a challenge. Like, teams are getting him on draws, or they're going to get him on those counter plays. So as much as they do want to play nickel, and I think Billy Bowman has had his flashes, it's just they're undersized there. And I think they're not the only team that struggles with it. So it's just you kind of got to pick your battles, and you have to hope the likes of Kate Nellis and Divine Diablo could take on those blocks and make some key plays there, because they're capable of doing that. But there's just times where you have them against a pretty good offensive line, they're going to get that second level and take them away. So I think it's just the limitations of the scheme. I don't know what alterations they could make. I know Taquan Graham's coming off IR, but I don't know how he fits into the rotation. I think the Falcons have a pretty crowded rotation to begin with. I think it's ultimately just going to depend on how these young players develop.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, for those not familiar with what I'm talking about, like when they go to those 4-man fronts and they're nickel, what that does is it really does invite those double teams, those combo blocks on the 2 interior D tackles. And I think right now they just don't really have the guys that are really good at absorbing that, those double teams. Like, I think probably LaCale London, Rook, and, Harrison, I thought really struggled with that against Washington. I thought he was much better in the first couple of games with that. And so for me, it's like one of those things where, like, unless this interior group is penetrating, they're not going to consistently win. And so when those guys are being combo blocked, then it allows one of those offensive linemen to peel off that double team, climb to the second level, take out one of the linebackers. And if Divine Diablo or Caden Else, is able to avoid that and slip that, you can make it work. But if they can't get there before that blocker gets to them on the second level, there's nobody really on the second level to really stop the run at that point on those interior runs. And so that's why, like I say, it's vulnerable. That style of defense, this style of defense, I think, is vulnerable to the run, because you really need, I think it worked for the Jets because they had a Quinnen Williams, a guy that could consistently win in those situations. And like, you see penetration from David Onyemata, you see it from Dorlus and some of these other guys on the interior. You see Divine Diablo and Caden Ellis occasionally shooting these gaps and making plays at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield, but they're not quite consistent enough to offset some of those inherent weaknesses. And I think that's contributing to why this team is so vulnerable to the run in that specific front. And we'll just sort of have to see if I agree with you. I think it's just going to be, do you get better play from this group of players and they just get more comfortable and more effective being that attacking scheme in this defense? But that being said, are there any other things that kind of stand out to you about this team that you want to see them get better at? I know the low-hanging fruit is like special teams in the kicking game, but is there any other sort of thing that stands out to you about this team that could get better coming out of the bye week?
I've been impressed with the offensive line in terms of just them holding up in pass protection for the most part. I do see some inconsistencies in run blocking, but I touted him before the year, and he's let me down so far. Matthew Bergeron, I think, has just been off. They played better against Washington, but the stunts in particular, when him and Matthews aren't on the same page, I think it's largely on Bergeron. Like, he's the one that's overcommitting too much and just getting too, I don't know if he's just getting too aggressive, but it just seems like he doesn't know how to peel off for just his reactions are. I don't know if he's just playing too much on edge, but it's just something that's been off with him. So I do want to see the offensive line from a communication standpoint get a little better there. just because I think these are kind of fundamentals that you expect from particularly that side. Like they've been playing together for their third season now. So you expect better from Bergeron. I think Matthew's been pretty fantastic. He's quietly having one of his better years. Not quite impactful when it comes to run blocking, but I think he's held up very well against particularly whoever's edge rushing against them. But I would just like to see the offense line a little bit more cohesive, even though they're coming off a pretty good game against Washington. You can't have every week where Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier are basically in superhero mode, which I just thought against Washington. You want to talk about high-level running. Like, they pretty much did it all. And you want to help them. You want to make sure they're not having to break 3 tackles to get 5 yards. There's moments where Algier had to do it. And you just want to see a little bit more cohesiveness there, particularly from the left side. I think Newsel and Wilkinson have exceeded expectations so far.
Yeah. So let's get into this Bills game and preview this Monday night matchup. And we've already talked about some of the areas where the Falcons have a favorable matchup. We'll talk about some of the areas where the Falcons have a less than favorable matchup, and we'll get into all of that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons with Allen Strk. Let's talk about this Bills game. We talked about some of the favorable matchups I think the Falcons have in terms of their skill players going up against some of the players on the Bills defense. You talked about the run game. Do you kind of go into this game expecting a shootout where both of these offenses have favorable matchups, on either side? Because when I look at the Bills offense, like, I see an offensive line that's really good at pass protection. So even the improved Falcons pass rush, I'm skeptical whether or not they're going to be able to get serious pressure on Josh Allen. We've already talked about the vulnerabilities with the run defense. James Cook did not have a big impact in that Patriots game, but I expect a bounce back week for him. And so it does feel set up to me that at least, big picture, both of these offenses should have lots of success moving the football against the opposing team. You feel like that's a fair assessment? Did I get anything wrong in that?
No, it's spot on. I don't know if I expect like ultra fireworks where I can see both offenses really trying to do like a ball control style game plan where I think whoever has most time possession probably wins, just because both these teams are so efficient at running the ball. The Bills probably utilize more power. Like, I expect them to use duo. They're not using 6 offensive linemen as much. I forget his first name, but Hawes, the third string tight end, they're starting to utilize him more often. Do you know, is it Spencer? Okay, I was gonna say Spencer Hawes, but wait, no, it's NBA center. Wouldn't be an episode without me messing up a name. But nevertheless, the Bills, they had Alec Anderson last year. Now they're utilizing more 13 personnel, and the idea of a team going jumbo on the Falcons' other side front is pretty terrifying. But I am curious to see, just because he has been such a star so far, to be blunt. But Divine Diablo, if they're going to utilize, or even Caden Ellis, like having a spy Josh Allen on third downs, because I think you saw Detroit in particular had success against Lamar Jackson. I wonder if teams now going against these dynamic quarterbacks that are so dangerous with their legs, are they going to utilize more spy? Because based on the Falcons front, I don't see them generating much pressure with the front four. I feel like they've been very disappointing the last 2 games. And I know Jeff Ulbrich has a history of doing well against Josh Allen, but the Falcons don't really have a Quinn Williams, like you said, or I don't even know if they have a John fucking Myers, man, or CJ Mosley for that matter. So I'm not sure how they should base it, but at least he has that experience. But I do think this will be pretty high scoring, but I wouldn't expect like the 30, 40-yard plays to be that prevalent. I think it's going to be more the 10 to 20-yard runs. And I think it's just a matter of who tackles better and who's going to maintain their gap integrity and who's not going to get blown 8 yards off the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think, if it does turn into that kind of ball control type of game, like who converts in the red zone probably is going to, if you go 2 for 4 in the red zone and the other team goes 1 for 3 or whatever, like that's probably going to be the difference between, winning, especially in these so often these 1-score games.
We know who has the advantage in the red zone. And it'll also be curious to see if Ed Oliver plays because he was a monster against the Ravens, but I believe he's been out ever since.
That sounds right. He's missed games. I can't tell you exactly how, but he's missed a couple of games.
But I think he's really developed into being one of the premier disruptive interior tackles, and he is a problem if he does play. But look, that Bills front is pretty light. I think it's going to be asking a lot of Matt Milano coming off a serious injury. It's going to be, I believe, his second game. So I think both defenses can be had. It's a matter of red zone efficiency, and unfortunately, the Falcons, the red zone is the enigma that continues.
Well, I don't know because I know Milano left the last game. So I don't know what his status is. Obviously, we will find out tomorrow on the crossover Thursday with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. He'll have the scoop on there. That's why I don't feel compelled to know that information because Joe will tell me tomorrow. But it does make me feel like, okay, this could be a similar game as we saw with Washington, where you had Bijan, favorable matchups against those linebackers. You could have a similar situation here in this Buffalo game, particularly if Milano is limited or out for this game. And maybe the solution to the red zone problems is just Bijan scores like he did in week 1 on those explosive plays that he can get, making whoever, Terrell Bernard and Cole Bishop miss in the open field. And that will solve your red zone issues because you're just scoring on 40-yard touchdowns, right?
Bijan going against Taylor Rapp in the open field, I think we know the odds that we like there. I just think, Buffalo, their open field tackling. It's not just them going against Derrick Henry because I think Derrick Henry's kind of put them in a highlight reel so many times. But you just see in other games, like even against New England, like Stephon Diggs was making them look silly. And it was great to see Stephon Diggs doing his thing, but we know he's at the aging part of his career. But I think red zone, like you said, and then can you capitalize on a turnover? AJ Terrell coming back, it seems like he's making good progress there. And the one underrated aspect of AJ Terrell's game is I think he's actually been better as a playmaker over the last 2 years because I know some of the true font, coming into the league, you just saw him consistently drop interceptions and just miss those big play opportunities. But I would say ever since 2023, I remember he had interceptions in Carolina where he just totally, I think it was on a deep cross or undercut an Andy Dalton pass. It was a really impressive diving play. I think he also had a really nice interception against Tampa that year. I think it was a flea flick. No, that was a Jesse Bates.
That was Jesse Bates, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it was maybe it was a wheel route, and he was playing zone coverage, and he passed off a receiver, and he undercut a deep ball from Baker. And it was a very acrobatic play. And I just think one of these, I think the big things about the defensive improvement compared to 2 years ago is just that this defense has legit ball hawks. Like Xavier Watts can go get it. Blake Bowman's can get his hands around the ball. At some point, Jesse Bates is going to have his moment. So, and we know Josh Allen is pretty much the most fearless quarterback in the league. So if they could capitalize on just one mistake, and if Michael Penix could remain composed, because Penix can put the ball in dangerous areas, and sometimes he doesn't know how to layer the ball, as we saw against Washington. So it just in these types of games, like one turnover can make a huge difference. And between the red zone efficiency and turnovers, and who knows, like the Falcons, I think I know that they're 4-point underdog, but I don't think it would be a colossal upset if they win this game. I think they're more than capable of doing it.
Yeah, we'll see. I think they have a shot. They have a shot.
Do you think the Bills are the best team in the league?
I'm trying to think. I no team that immediately jumps to mind that I say like that team is the best team in the league. So I guess yes, I think so.
It's them or Philly, it has to be, right?
That feels right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Philly to me is
their passing game's a disaster.
Yeah. So you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So it's hard to be like they're number one. It's like, yeah.
I just think the Bills are a little vulnerable, even though I know they're coming off a loss, so you know they're going to be focused. But the Falcons do have some good matchups coming. I just think with their defense being so opportunistic and with Ulbricht's scheme, like they're gonna go down in flames one way or the other. Either they're gonna rise up, quote unquote, and just rattle Josh Allen and force 2 turnovers, or they're gonna blitz and get burnt by a few plays. But I just don't see them getting completely trampled or just laying down, which is encouraging to see. I just think, given the personnel groupings and what Ulbricht brings, particularly on third downs, this game's going to tell us a lot of how this team's built against a legit Super Bowl contender. And I think it's going to give these young players some much needed big game experience, because these are the games where hopefully in January they're going to be playing.
Yeah. I agree with that. I'm expecting a competitive game. I'm just, final 2 minutes, Josh Allen. I'm going to bet on Josh Allen over Michael Penix at this point. And that's not a knock on Michael Penix. It's Josh Allen, right? So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, open field tackling is going to be one of the biggest things. I think whoever misses, we talk about red zone fishing. I think whoever misses the least amount of tackles go this game, because I just think both teams are kind of vulnerable to it, more from the Bills personnel standpoint. But I do think between Josh Allen, James Cook, and even someone like a Khalil Shakir, who is very dangerous in the open field, I just think the Bills have players that can make 3 or 4 players look silly on one play. So I think.
Yeah. I'm curious about Keon Coleman in this game, because the Falcons don't really have guys that match up well with big receivers. Now, AJ Terrell, I thought, played one of his best games against Mike Evans in week 1 that we have seen him play. So I'm hoping that AJ is ready to beat the allegations that have been true for 4+ years, that he struggles against bigger wide receivers. But, Keon Coleman, as we saw with like Ted McMillan against Billy Bowman, I could see a world where the Bills are like, oh, well, let's put this, 6'6" wide receiver up against this 5'6" corner and see how it goes,
I like Keon Coleman, but he is far from the finished product, and I think there are maddening tendencies with this play. It's not just a route running either. I just think sometimes he loses concentration, and there's games where he might only get 3 or 4 targets.
Yes. You saw that this past Sunday night, right? Where he had some big catches and he had some big mistakes in that game. So we'll see. I'm a little nervous that because of the Falcons' history of being the get right team, that this will be the Keon Coleman breakout on Monday Night Football. But we'll see if that is the case. Any parting thoughts, Alan, before we duck out of here?
Curtis Samuel's had his moments in the past. You want to talk about a former player from a division rival? I can see Curtis Samuel doing some wacky things.
Okay, we'll see. So we'll get into more of this Bills matchup tomorrow on the Crossover Thursday with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Alan, anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
No, I'm all set, man. Thank you. It's always a pleasure breaking down the tape with you. This team is very intriguing this year. I think I'm more energetic about them this year compared to last. And I love primetime football, and the fact that this team is on primetime next 2 weeks is exciting. And it looks like that 9:30 game in Germany is going to be a barn burner.
Absolutely. So we'll see. My excitement level will heavily depend on how Monday night goes. So
you better let the listeners know. I know for these international games, you make one hell of a breakfast, so you better let the listeners know what you got planned for that.
Okay, I will get on it. We'll get some strudel and sauerkraut going. We'll
sausage.
We'll incorporate some sausage. Some German mustard, all that stuff. So
and folks, he won't get PBR. He's gonna get proper German beers.
Yeah, sure.
With my recommendation, because I'm a German fanatic.
Okay, there you go. So, guys, there you have it. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube. Go check out all the other NFL content. Trades. No Kirk Cousins trade, Joe Flacco trade. Get the latest on that on Locked On NFL. 2 shows daily. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.